Gustav Mahler once said that a symphony should contain an entire world. Over the course of his career, composer, songwriter, arranger, and singer Dyke Parks has created a series of solo albums for which that description certainly applies. Each is a world unto itself, and all are absolutely unique musical creations of extraordinary richness. On May 2nd, 2018, I had a spirited discussion with Dyke Parks. I wanted to address a topic that I think is of the greatest urgency, the no man's land, the sort of gray zone between vernacular and so-called serious music. Often, composers tend to stick resolutely to one or the other, but Dyke Parks is one of those rare figures who seem to inhabit both worlds simultaneously. Like Charles Ives or Harry Partch before him, the music of Dyke Parks stems from the wellspring of American and Pan-American vernacular music, but also transcends and transfigures it. As he once said in an interview, unserious music is pretty serious stuff. We talked about the importance of accessibility and communication, his early experiences with the Moog synthesizer, why the notion of service is so important to him, what he has learned from composers like Percy Grainger, and his ongoing string quartet project with the Kronos Quartet. His Twitter handle is @the Parks, and I hope you enjoy our discussion. Well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I know you're extraordinarily busy, and it's a real honor to be able to talk to you. So thank you.
Well, being busy is a sign of inefficiency.
So how do you combat that?
I work all the time. I work. It's easy for me, though. I don't have to do anything heroic. I live in a virtual state of semi-consciousness 24 hours a day. And this makes it easy for me to get re-involved with any thought that I've left suspended.
So
does that make sense to you, Sam Andreyev?
That makes perfect sense to me. No, I know what you mean about inefficiency, though. It's usually a bad sign if you feel extremely busy. In my view, anyway. I mean, it's easy to just fill up your days with things that maybe aren't completely essential.
I work on many fronts because we are of modest means, my wife and I. She's seen me through many years with incredible loyalty, which is what it takes if you're a musician and have a dedicated monogamy. You invite that kind of loyalty if you're a musician because of the uncertainties that it imposes. Now, I don't think that that's a sign of inefficiency. For a musician to feel insufficient is really, I think, it's not fair, because musicians, by dint of what they do, are always writing themselves out of a job.
Right.
And that's precarious.
Right.
And so, the idea people say, you enjoy what you do, or do you enjoy what you've done, or basically, I enjoy having finished a job that cannot be addressed again. It comes to a completion, and then you find some satisfaction in it. And ultimately, then with the slings and arrows of critical invective, you must be satisfied that the pleasure of the work itself is to your great glory, and if you have any abstract thoughts of divination, to the glory of your maker. So that's the way I look at it.
That's very interesting, because one thing I've actually noticed in a lot of your interviews and in your writings as well is that you talk about, you have a sort of service mentality towards music. It's not so much about the glorification of an individual ego so much, but you're focused on what you can contribute, and also on bettering the lives, it seems, of the people that you work with. But
I think that music should, although it's ultimately an art, and it cannot be lassoed in a casual, cavalier way by some average musician such as myself. What music does is present an opportunity to serve, and ultimately that's not because I'm such a nice guy. It's because there's something indistinguishable to others, but unextinguishable. And that is the pragmatic value that music can bring. The real service it can bring has to do with, it adheres to things that you want to get done. For me, the covenant of social justice and equanimity, I mean, to me, that's a big thing, the peace between people, peace in the kingdom, or whatever we're calling it. that to me is very important. The stewardship of the earth, that to me is very important. Those things, those concerns you have must insinuate themselves into your work, or you're not getting a fair shake. You should feel that your work does support and validate your own inclinations. So that's really the reason that I might look like I have some agenda. I don't want to be seen as having an agenda. I think works, for example, I think all work that matters to me, especially if it's simply invites the banality of populism, let's say popular work, pop music and stuff, which is where I come from, or where I ended up in my lettuce years. This is, it must address these, what have become sociopolitical forces, ecology, the stewardship of the earth, and so forth. And that doesn't mean that one needs to get out a ball-peen hammer to drive attack. I don't think that we need to bludgeon people consciously to assail them with our righteous indignation. I think what we do is we try to make something attractive. That's very important to me. It must appeal to the ear. Why? Because to me, the most convincing music, now I don't mean the most obvious, because what is obvious can often really come as a curse. But that is something almost like inevitable to the casual observer. A person should be able to hear that work. I'm not speaking of music now. And I think it applies to the art that we can put into that hermetically sealed capsule called pop art. I think it's the same with the visual arts and the architecture. This is kind of like, as I've mentioned in many interviews, what invites the art of cliche. That is, certain musical events or certain musical properties, the most obvious being, the masculinity associated with a French horn trio, or the delicacy of a harp solo, what we think is delicate, which actually can be a savage attack of plectrum value. So to me, it's like to pull on these cliches, to pull on these objects that have a precognitive value to the listener. And that is to tap into the listener's needs, which are the listener's nostalgia, the listener's prejudices, and to try to get in that gate through some of the most commonplace tools. Naturally, by admitting that kind of vulgarity, somebody said, well, you're not very creative. No, I'm not creative at all. I am reactive. And I think that my reactive abilities are what my work is all about. I'm reacting to things. I'm not an innovator. We've seen it. I did spend some time. If you study the scant information that's left of my synthesizer days, it's like in 64, 65. Then I was one of 4 people in Los Angeles who had a Moog, and we started out with what I had left when I was in conservatory: white noise, pink noise, static, reduced in academia to non-melodic, ametrical musical severities, post-industrial depression, beyond the age of anxiety, black and white information, sometimes gray or striated, but not memorable. Not memorable because there was nothing to hang on to that was really expositionary, which is what a melody offers. So I turn to the simplicity. You might think I'm very simple. I turn to the simplicities of melody because I feel that is something that I could hang my modest gifts on. And then I would make some use of that. And I've made many, many mistakes in my loyalty to that, but I felt comfortable about it.
It always strikes me that music is at its strongest, art in general is at its strongest when it's rooted in the vernacular. on some level.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think what I have observed in my 75 years, and I've been self-supporting, admittedly, quite modestly, and I owe people money, but I have supported myself since I was 9 years old when I got my Social Security number at the Metropolitan Opera Company of New York City, being an urchin in La Boheme, conducted by Thomas Beecham. So I've had some good moments that validated by being taken onto a stage at Carnegie Hall with Arturo Toscanini. Got a bow with him because I just happened to be the shortest member of a very large ensemble. We were singing Boito's Mephistopheles Prologue. That was in 1955, the year before Toscanini died. Thank God he had a rope around the podium. A very fine piece of music, the Mephistopheles Prologue by Boito, and I would suggest if you listen to it, you might come to the same conclusion I had when I was 9 years old, and that is that possibly that Verdi's librettist may have been a superior musical talent. But when I got to the synthesizer, it was an abreaction from the severity of those things I was talking about, modern music. When I was in the boy choir, I sang Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire. I was 12 years old. I nailed the piece. It's a very hard piece of music. And I was undaunted by it. And I fell in love with it and understood it. It's a dream escape. This to me was a big deal. The very title, how can you follow a title like that? It's so ephemeral. Well, but when I got out of college, and we're talking about past John Cage and many other extremists in adventurism in music, I wanted something that was immediate, not necessarily fast food either. I wanted to open myself to other idioms, like you were mentioning vernacular, and I fell in love with them. So fall, I'll be coming out with a co-produced album with a young girl. She's younger than my own daughter, Gabby Moreno. She's Guatemalan, and the record is called Spangled, and it's a romp through retro-romantic Pan-American classics that explores the rhythms of various countries in Latin America in the 40s and 50s, when before America had a chance to get ugly, when tourism was at its apogee of refinement and everything was coming up roses on these Yankee clippers to South America. So that you can see I have re-embraced using the hyperbole of rhythm and so forth to get me through the gate so I can somehow participate as a musician, because it's all I know. I don't have a plan B. When I worked on the Moog synthesizer, and the reason I mentioned that to you is because I wanted to brag a bit about what I did when I was a brunette. The music, you see, when I got to a Moog synthesizer, we started out with this white noise. There was no keyboard. There were a bunch of phone jacks and patch bass, and there were there were a lot of innies for those outies. And it took an agonizing amount of time to develop a p. So when I got the synthesizer to say ice capades, I knew that artificial speech was something that could have medical value for combat injuries over a phone. Synthetic speech could get people into parking lots to take the ticket. But that was beyond anyone's comprehension at the time. We were working alone. Nobody taught me nothing. And I had to learn how to replicate speech. I had to learn how to replicate, to the best of my ability, a string sound, all of which sounds antediluvian. Right now sounds Jurassic. But horn sounds and so forth, clarinet, oboe. I've worked on this stuff called, and that's available on the YouTube. You can hear, if you go Dyke Parks Moog, you'll hear what I did in my experiments. It's not great music, but it was a great musical adventure. And it taught me how many cycles should determine a plectrum value, for example. What would I use in Hertz, and who was Hertz, and why did he do what he did? So all of this, the physicality of sound, just seeing on a cathode ray tube that the synesthetic corollary to a sawtooth guitar was an actual sawtooth. And when I started hearing ambulances go by, I heard that sawtooth wave on a sine wave control voltage. Zzz, and I heard that, and I realized what a brilliant way to arrest traffic. So sound became very important to me, the very nature of sound, and that was just at the dawn of, I would call it, the golden age of analog recording, which was in the 60s and 70s. And that's when I went from a 3-track machine to youthful excess.
You figured these things out basically on your own, but what about, and I know that you had a training as a clarinetist and you sang in choirs when you were younger. And what about composing though? What about counterpoint and harmony and those sorts of things? Did you?
No, matter of fact, I didn't study in choirs. I had one choir, the Columbus Boy Choir, which was an incredible, unique institution of American academic value. A boy choir, something not of this time, really. One would think we would go up to New York to raid the best jobs. We'd go from Princeton, New Jersey. Well, the St. Thomas Boy Choir sat idly by. We got the best jobs with Osawa and Beecham and Ormandy and all the great conductors of the time, while Vienna stood there with their questionable intonation with their boy choir. Rather flaccid, I always felt. I wanted the rich textures of them that were influenced by American vernacular. If you hear the American Boy Choir or the Columbus Boy Choir, that boarding school that I went to from 52 to 57, if you hear them on YouTube singing Stars and Stripes, you'll hear what I'm talking about. Incredible. And what we did with Kodai and all of this, so that when the Mysteries of the Bulgar came out, I was prepared for it. I was prepared because I'd lived with and loved Kodai. So one school really influenced me. That was a boy choir experience. But then when my voice changed, so did my chances. And I lost all chances because I can't sing. I spent a career trying to put records with my voice on them so that I simply had the opportunity to develop a studio experience. That's what interested me. It is now like Miss Haversham's cake, just turned to dust. There is no industry. No one wants to listen. No one has the time to listen to an album. It's a magazine format and scatter mentality. It is a bat cave with the positive and negative impulses all averaging zero.
You reacted to that in a very interesting way, though, with Song Cycled, I think, because you released that album in a very unconventional manner, which I think is a reaction to the current state of the industry, right? You put out these very elaborate singles, vinyl singles, a series of them, before you actually released the entire album.
And when you say elaborate, compared to what? I mean, you know what I'm saying. I don't think of my work as unduly elaborate, and I don't go into decorated, although I do favor hyperbole. I really do.
Well, you commissioned artworks from some very prominent and
I wish I could tell you you're correct. I didn't pay a dime for any of these. I didn't pay a dime for any of the pictures. You look at the pictures that decorated those works. For example, this one by Klaus Bormann. He's put me in the corner there in an irreducible minimum in blue jeans, or that is in overalls, Uberallis, at the bottom of a vast expanse of wheat. Klaus did this acrylic in 24 hours. Wow. This is after he had endured a stroke. There are 2 life-size statues, which I did not commission. There's one. There's my wife's, the story of Katrina. I'm from Mississippi, as is she. There's another life-size statue. They are in a warehouse. The man who did the statues has a giant statue that was in the Grand Canal of Venice. It's now at the entrance of the Getty Museum in Los Angeles, along with a lot of other European treasures. So I didn't pay anything for these covers.
You had the idea that this was a good thing to do, though, that it was worth accompanying these musical works with concomitantly interesting visual art, and that's not an ordinary thing to do. I mean, that's going beyond what normally happens.
Well, very interesting. This is my favorite story in my as a directive for my own musical pursuits. This was a big one. And you may have heard it. Stop me if you have, because it's not epic. It's just something that matters to me. There is a relationship between sight and sound. I made a career of it. I went to Warner Brothers, produced the first music videos, and a baker's dozen. They're very fine. If you go on YouTube, you look at Ry Cooder documentary, mini documentary. It's 15 minutes. We just limited its time to what it took before they'd have to hire an extra projectionist at a neighborhood theater. I had it figured out. I had it so figured out, the artist would receive 25% of the net proceeds. Turns out, Warner Brothers thought it was a great idea to connect sight to sound and started making videos, but they thought that the idea of giving a residual to the artist was something that they had no interest in. So I quit. What I wanted to do was save musicians from the embattlement of the road, because I knew so many who were dying. Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, this list goes on. Many people you haven't heard of, Lowell George, a lot of people you haven't heard of died because of this narcotic necessity to promote records. So I wanted to bring sight and sound together, but you see, that wasn't my idea, because I'll tell you, when I was a boy, I was in a television show. I was in that television show as an actor. I went to New York from Princeton, New Jersey, to be in a show, and I did it to make the money to go to the school. It wasn't that I was interested in acting. I'm not interested in acting. I want to be. I was sitting there, and I was the star of the show, and it was a live show. It was very important. New York was the repository for out-of-work New York actors of the highest caliber. Brando et al. Was, and with Stanislavski's method of acting, and so all this stuff. These actors were wonderful. And at one point, I found myself next to this woman whose name was Dorothy Gish. And turns out Dorothy Gish and her sister Lillian, they were the sweethearts of D.W. Griffith. And after the French invented cinema, cine, the Americans monetized it and found a way to distribute it. And these girls, the Gish sisters, were the Madonnas of their age. Their personalities in silent pictures helped indoctrinate people to film that wasn't just another pornographic dismissal. They acted in silent pictures. So I heard about this. I was 9 years old. I heard about this woman. I was sitting next to a legend, and she had a bit part, and I was the star. And they were over there trying to figure out what to do during the commercial for this live television show in New York. I think that it was Westinghouse Studio One. I'm not sure, but it's a Google away. And I said, Miss Gish, I understand you and your sister were really big in the film industry, and you helped make film an industry with your wonderful personalities. Well, something to that effect. And she said, oh, thank you, boy. That's a very, very nice of you to remark on that. Thank you. So I didn't want to let the ball drop. I sensed something was important here. I said, well, Miss Gish, weren't you apprehensive is the word I used. I mean, when you heard the talkies were coming. She said, that's a very good question. But you see, when we heard that sound was coming to film, all of us actors, we didn't call them yet the talkies. And we all just assumed that all that sound would be music.
Oh, interesting.
Yes, it is interesting. That stuck with me my entire life. By the time I came out to California from 1963, when I think, I did an arrangement, a very small arrangement, nothing big, no big deal. And I had an opportunity to be called arranger on The Bare Necessities, which was in The Jungle Book. And that was a Disney picture. And that was my first job as an arranger in the union. I got money. And that was how I got to my brother's funeral. With the money I got from that, I got a black suit and a two-way ticket to my elder brother's funeral. Thank God. So you see, and that's what changed my life. That's when I decided I would leave academia forever and pay my way in California. And if these people thought I was competent, it's possible. Now, I want to tell you something. I'm not proud of any of this. Not proud of the good fortune I've had that has come with some great insults, always interlaced with great insults. How about this one? When a producer turns to you and your life is on the line, and this could be your defining moment in your life, and the producer says to you, Sam, I'm sorry to say we don't have any money in the music budget for musicians. A producer actually told me that once. Van Dyke, we have no money in the music budget for musicians. You know what I said to him? I said, well, you sure got the right composer. So, anyway. Yeah, but you see, but the reason I mention this is because I've had the good fortune of finding a practical role in the application of my music. So I don't have to worry about advancing beyond the arcana of John Cage or Penderecki or whatever. I don't have to do that. I don't have to turn to abstract thought to prove that there's some tensile strength in my musculature.
There is a component of abstraction in what you do, though. I mean, so that's kind of interesting, because if you look at some of the lyrics you were writing in the 1960s, I mean, it's hard not to think of literary modernism when you read those.
I am the things I've read. I have a great library here, a great library of, and I am the things I've read, and I was not afraid. I was not afraid of. I was not afraid of abstract thought. I embraced the Lord when I was little. And the reason I did that is because I loved the music. I wasn't in church just to put bubblegum under a pew in a choral loft. I was there to hear the music. Look at this book.
Oh, yes, I've never seen that.
Would you believe that I'm in it? Book of Great Music Writing.
Huh.
I'm in this book, and guess what? Not as a composer. They didn't include me. They didn't include me. But they did let me write the foreword. Mathematician, philosopher, Pythagoras was born and raised in the country, but he hit the road early. He hit Memphis, the Egyptian one, Cairo, not Illinois, and even met the Pharaoh, though not Sam the Sham. In short, Pythagoras was as global as one could be. He met all the who that were who in those days, 6th century BC, because he was a giant with charisma, warmth, and charm galore, star qualities. They were quieter times for sure. You could hear yourself think. Pythagoras dug music the most, so he took time to design the octave and the fifth. He figured it all out, how we would sing to the gods and each other by codifying the modes. Some modes were rosy, onward Christian soldiers, Ionian. Some were blue, my Yiddish mama, Aeolian, now the modified Hungarian minor. Rules governed modal use and gave music its traction and purpose. One such rule, introduced by Rome that decreed the tritone leap taboo, diabolis in musica, was unlocked only after many medieval ghosts had been exorcised from the mind of Western man. Enlightenment of that sort was the direct result of movable print. Yet I digress. This is the book. It's very interesting. Now, so I thought about all this music, but what I'm saying is to get my family under a roof and fed and educated as I had been. Everything. We didn't get the swimming pool next to Steve Stills. We didn't get the house on the hill. We sent our kids to great schools so that they could be hardwired to one day be illuminated and resist everything that had been taught by the right-wing fanaticism that hardwiring invites. And so, you know, the thing is, I was pressed into serving in film scoring, stuff that we can't talk about because it's anonymous work. It's, you know, who would care? You know, it's like recently I got a film offer. I turned to Sally, my wife, I said, do I have to do this? And she said, no, honey. I said, thank you. So I said, why not? She said, who's going to care if you did a remake of the Black Swan or whatever in 10 years from now? I said, you're right. So I'm doing music that matters to me, once again, with just music that can't be sold, which is simply audio. And we somehow make ends meet by taking on arrangements. But in every case, and I'm learning this better and better, in every case, like I found out the hard way, that the curse of a film composer is to have an identity. I fear that there are so many musicians who want to be known for something, identified with something, and it is, and I just want to caution those people at that clearing. Identity, or the search for personality to be known for something, is an absolute curse. It's an estoppel to any employment in film composition. You have to be ready to be nobody. If somebody comes by rapping it down with a ghetto blaster on his ear, and yet there's a couple in the next scene that aren't in love and a lip lock with no dialogue, and who aren't in love and need to be, you need a large room maybe of strings or something that is a reasonable facsimile. So this takes the absence of personality. And I know this might sound like a small opinion, but I think it's a large realization, and it's certainly an awakening for me, that I didn't have to feel bad that I have an insufficient personality for the vulgar public gaze. It stopped bothering me. I wish I hadn't been under-agented, and I was. I have no agent. And to me, this is a lot of this is, and almost to have an agent in this town, I think, is something to be condemned. So I invite people that are struggling with musical advancement to remember things that now seem so obvious to me, that I'm reaching an age where stamina itself is the commodity that fuels you into the potential for a diamond lane, to come close to being able to at least finish the race. And it's a matter of stamina. So now that I get here, I've got to admit, I wish I had learned some of this sooner. I just want people who are struggling in music to start thinking first about that thing called serving. Don't lose sight of the fact that long ago we had reached a point of abstract art, of non-representative music, that is electronic, in electronica and in acoustic combination. So ain't it grand? So, but the point is, and this is what the price we pay. In so doing, musicians who have proven that, yes, music is the highest math. Okay, so maybe somebody wants to argue that point with you for a while, but check it out. You know, make a career out of saying, I was in Einstein's kitchen for an hour and a half with Einstein, one of four boys, singing Noels while he improvised descants to our Noels. This Jewish man taking time for us at Advent in Princeton. So I know a lot of stuff about the invitation to mathematical integrity in musical design. Voice leading is everything to me. It really is. I agonize about voice leading, turning the page and finding that I haven't taken too great a leap of faith. And my point of saying this is, remember that music has already proven, absolutely proven, that it can develop a language which cannot be understood.
Yes, that's fascinating.
And if you don't have the humility to make communication job one in art, you belong with a quick back end in a business like plumbing. You should get your money and get lost. Art is for people who want to communicate. In music, to me, I know that this is a lot to ask, and this is not a dogma, but this is something that I just find as a predilection. If I leave a concert hall with an earworm, somebody's driven into my head unwittingly, that I'm carrying out, I am leaving with something, for example. And if I haven't heard a melody that I can carry out of there, I feel shortchanged if I manage to pay for it. Now, there is so to me, accessibility, and this is something I learned after Song Cycle, by the way, when I was still recovering from my brother's death. It is in the psychological nature of my life that I did that album. Take this, a television theme. Somebody wants a television theme. I have a friend who did a television theme. That's her. That was the theme. That, not even a fucking triad. I mean, the irreducible minimum. Bum, bum, bum. A diatonic sweep up to a slight alteration.
Well, I want to.
And that was Mork and Mindy. That made that man a multimillionaire, but he had already become a multimillionaire with another theme song that's been on television for about 60 years, a soap opera. So the inestimable Perry Botkin Jr., who did many arrangements at Warner Brothers in the halcyon days, the 60s and 70s.
But I want to ask you about the question of accessibility, though, because your music is profoundly rooted in all of these different vernacular traditions, and not just one, but multiple different traditions, right? There's not just the American side, but there's also there's calypso. There's all sorts of things that come into it, and also you draw upon music from the 19th century. I mean, it goes back quite a ways as well, but the albums are unbelievably ambitious. They take a long time to digest. They do have an immediacy to them, obviously. I found them instantly fascinating when I heard them. But you have to listen to them a lot of times to pull everything apart, right? I mean, there's a lot going on in them. And you certainly get your money's worth. I mean, there's the equivalent of 20
what money? One. Did you pay some money?
Oh, I did. The first album of yours I bought was Moonlighting when I was probably, gosh, how old was I? 14 or 15, maybe.
95. I think that was 95 or 98 or one of those years.
And I listened to that thing hundreds of times. I mean, I found it completely enthralling. But it's not... It has an immediacy to it. It does have an immediate appeal, but it also has something that you can listen to it many, many times and not exhaust it. And especially something like Song Cycle, for example. You can't digest that on one hearing. So how does accessibility come into it with albums like that? Or, I mean, Orange Crate Art is another example. I mean, there's so much going on in it. It's unbelievably rich on so many levels.
Well, I'm just amazed because I don't know why this is not working. It's very interesting to me. I wanted so much to be able to play you some, but first of all, you use the word digest. I don't see there's any reason to digest an album. Sam, if you've been doing that, you're inviting microplastics. Really, some PCBs and stuff. Watch that stuff. It's cancer carcinogenous. But I had no idea of why I was doing the reason I did the record was to placate Warner Brothers. I wanted to be a record producer and arranger, and I signed an artist contract so that I could have that opportunity, not for any other reason. I had no idea what a record should do or should not do, and I still don't, except this. I know that my singing days are spent. That is my attempts at singing. And now I'm going to look for the voices, other people to be cast in those positions. And that's why I'm having this record come out in the fall of this year. I'm so excited that Gabby Moreno has such a great voice and is you notice how the voice leading the voice leading is everything. And so I'm just trying to demonstrate, this is nothing that I can say that I'm a saint at, but this is something to which I aspire, and that is accessibility in my work, so that you can come away saying, oh, I know what that means immediately, and don't feel challenged or distracted or something, or perhaps not even listening to it. Put it on your alpha wave, but have it be confectionery, or have some even incidental nutritive value, and that's what I try to do. I try to get something there that will somehow arrest and develop the ear. And it's always been like that since Scriabin and his mystic chord.
Well, there is an unbelievable harmonic richness to a lot of your music, and I wanted to ask you about that actually, because you mentioned the mystic chord of Scriabin. There are mystic chords in Orange Crate art. There are extraordinarily elaborate harmonic progressions, and you have these really interesting bass. Sorry,
you mean in that particular song?
No, not that. I mean the album in general. I'm saying that the bass lines, for one thing, on that album in general are amazing. You have these.
What I like a lot. So recently, I tweet every day. I wish you would look at that, because you get an idea of what I try to do is make sense out of where we are, and I do that by observing birthdays.
Huh.
Every day I get up. Every day I get up and I take note of who was born that day, and somebody said that they had heard that record called Orange Crate Art, and they noted in their tweet, the Twitter, they said they took note that their favorite song was called Hobo Heart. And the reason for that was because it was so deceptive. And I remembered there's some reason that things are not, don't know why. This is on another occasion. I'm very happy that I have some instrumental versions from that record. I was going to play you one to show you how I try to think about the independence of every line.
Yes. Yeah.
This doesn't mean I'm going to get anywhere. I'm not going to go into places unknown, but I will go, but in territory that is fairly harmonically. So, Oh. Holding the, raising the fifth was a very big decision. So, sound very simple, you know, obviously was, you know, pianistic, because my music is derived from a pianistic approach, and that is not something I'm really ashamed, although I don't really usually think about, I develop a melody or something, but I will think at the keyboard. But if I'm away from the keyboard and I think of something, it's just a matter of maintaining that, what was that impression I had, and then taking it to the keyboard to organize it in notation, so that it's a matter of record. But I think that it is really the experience of having come through the likes of Robert Schumann, and Wolf and Schubert, and so, and that pianistic composer that showed me how to move my hand easily over a keyboard. This showed me the relationship between keyboard and the song form itself. In terms of vernacular, right now, like I'm looking at these guys, Granados and Albanese, to keep stuff that I can play in the next room on my grandfather's piano. Our Steinway came into the house on March 11th, 1911, when my father was born. It was called a matrimony gift, pianos. But I look at this stuff all the time. Let me see if I can clear this keyboard. It's supposed to be a guitaristic derivation. You can tell. You can tell. So you can tell where it comes from. And there's a shameless embrace of cliche and so forth. To state the obvious in a new way is, I think, to me, enough to get me through the day. And that's what, I mean, that's what I'm doing. I think it's important to seek refuge in the known and re-explore it, rather than demand that people digest, have to go through to digest what it is that you've gone, what your conceit it really provides. I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but what it is that you imagine. If you want to take them with you, you've got to have the explicative power to communicate and be understood. And hopefully, I mean, to me, what would be ideal, and this is the nature of a hit song, put that piece of art into the total possession of your correspondent. That's how good it has to be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, to me, who would have thought that he'd take a barroom song and elevate it to such a degree where he used that, what is that, Italian six chord? on his forgot. I almost forgot that thing. But that's to me, you know, you see, taking is something very ordinary, and also, you know, sometimes I'll do something like on the record that you were so sweet to mention songs cycled. I did. I put in what I called Amazing Graces because I had thought a lot about slavery all my life. I can't imagine someone in our family having ever enslaved someone else. But I married a girl from Memphis, and as I understand it, our daughter has a fraction of sub-Saharan blood in her, and which just fascinated and delights us. And it's a matter of mystery. Now I've got to go out and get my DNA tested to see if I'm as close to all those church graveyards as I somehow think. You know, the Van Dykes have been in the United States, they've been in America since 1646. That's when Jan Thomason Van Dyke came over on De Bunte Koe, the Spotted Cow, a celebrated Dutch warship. He's my ancestor. And his issue went to Pennsylvania, and from whence my grandmother came. And, but you see, I don't know what Americana is, but I know when I was at Carnegie Tech, Aaron Copland came by to a class, and one person, I'm not sure who it was, asked him, what is American music? And he said, well, American music is music that was written in America.
Right.
Which I think is perfectly good. Now I kind of get annoyed when I go to Czechoslovakia and people are playing me Frank Zappa. You know, I was in the group called the Mothers of Invention.
But your music seems to have, it has a lot of resonance in Europe, which is kind of strange when you think about it, because it is profoundly American music, and it draws upon a lot of American traditions, but it seems to really connect with people in Europe for some reason. Do you have an idea of why that might be?
Well, to me, no. I mean, I think that Europe has a lot more elastic tastes and a much more reasonable degree of forgiveness and exploration than American audiences do. America is, if you want to know, you know, and you don't have to turn to a fairy tale about a prince in a hall of mirrors. If you want to know what America thinks, look at the square in the Oval Office. That'll give you the litmus about what America is all about. And I am living in a tragic situation. And I think that it's possible that the American audience that I came from, for example, was a bunch of groups that wanted to look like cowboys, and it probably wouldn't know from which side to mount a horse. And I did, by the way. So, but there was a tremendous Nazism, you know, about music, what music should be. And I knew I would never be able to sing as eloquently as Neil Young, but I figured, you know, so I would pursue something else, and I wasn't going to be a cowboy. But it's very interesting to me because you think that I'm trying to be prepared for you. You think that you'd think I've been given a fair shake. People would say, oh, isn't that nice how you were treated by Warner Brothers? I'm sorry. There's another story. And the story is the reality of the contract relationships. It is a painful recollection to me, the time around a corporation, to see how the corporations have determined what American music might be. Recently, I did some quartets. I'd had about 35 minutes prepared. That actually had more, but I did only 35 minutes. And I went up and I did it with the Kronos Quartet at the San Francisco Jazz Festival.
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Crowd went bananas. Nobody did. Fine show. And I dictated, because I don't play publicly anymore on a piano. That's over. I can't sit at a piano 90 minutes without getting what you call trigger finger. I freeze. I've frozen some Scarlatti in an encore at the St. Passionkirche in Berlin. That was the slowest exit from Scarlatti I've ever made. They must have thought I was being very emotional.
Is that related to, is that a form of dystonia?
No, that's where the fingers just freeze. Because the percussion, of course, piano is a percussion instrument. Everybody thinks that's a hammer and a string. No, it's really a finger and a keyboard. Mm-hmm. That's where the weight is really concentrated. And because there's resilience in the shafts and so forth. There's a reason. There's more percussion, and I can't take it. I can't take it anymore. But so I decided to write some quartets, and I would write quartets to poetry. And the poetry would be the poetry of Lawrence Ferlinghetti. And Lawrence Ferlinghetti is now 96, I believe. And he's in San Francisco. He's a beat poet. And one of the reasons I went to California and espoused all that free relating poetry we talk about, that it was so confusing in Song Cycle, the free relating thoughts. You mentioned that I had received perhaps a notable favor in Europe, and I think you intimating that you know that it's not the same in my own country, a pariah in his own land, as they say. May I read you a poem of Lawrence Ferlinghetti?
Absolutely.
This has to do with our very hood, the very nationhood. This is who we are. Pity the nation whose people are sheep and whose shepherds mislead them. Pity the nation whose leaders are liars, whose sages are silenced, and whose bigots haunt the airwaves. Pity the nation that raises not its voice except to praise conquerors and acclaim the bully as hero, and aims to rule the world with force and by torture. Pity the nation that knows no other language but its own, and no other culture but its own. Pity the nation whose breath is money and sleeps the sleep of the too well-fed. Pity the nation, oh pity the people who allow their rights to erode and their freedoms to be washed away. My country, tears of thee, sweet land of liberty. That's a 96-year-old man writing that stuff down. That's a poet. And that was a reason for me to lift his work with a soundtrack, with an organized soundtrack for the best quartet I could find, which is built on recitative. Now, very interesting discipline, recitative. I've been interested in it since I was 12 and sang in Boston and Bastiana, which was written by Mozart when he was 12. I remember how he handled recitative, not too sophisticated a methodology, but then I started studying it because it became, to me, the acid test of great operatic ability. And so this was, to me, my best work. I still seek a patron for such an idea. It's going to take time. I'm going to have to spend, maybe I would spend another 3 months on getting a programmatic set together in an hour. But a question comes up, I'll put it to you this way, and I think you'll get an indication of the odds. You go to somebody, say a record label, and you say, do you remember Dyke Parks from the 60s? He's got a project of poetry. Are you interested? Now let's face it, nobody's going to put any money in me in this endeavor. So I was taken down a peg or two when I thought I could enter this thing. I would have expected a positive result by then. So I want you to know, if you're a musician, I'm somehow or another, Sam, I think you and I are speaking with musicians. That's the impression I get from your work. And I would suggest that anybody who might be listening, who has the challenges of surviving with an occupation in music, that anything I may have said is not tainted by success. There is an authority in success. F. Scott Fitzgerald noted that there is an authority in failure. And if I've learned anything at this point, at 75 and counting, it's that I know that I don't know. And I think that that's very important to maintain that uncertainty. Maybe the reason Europe realizes that there's something simpatico in what I deliver, it's that I really wish I were somewhere else but here. Maybe that's it. You managed to do it. But I will come back to Europe. I think this year, I think I can organize that. I think it will be done. But stay tuned on that, because if the label deal that we secure for our distribution of this fine album, it's a trilingual album, by the way, not to disappoint French friends or German friends. It's Pan-American, so it's Portuguese and Spanish and English. And it's called Spangled. That will be the album to watch for. As I proceed with another one, with this one with Daniel Johns, who was once in a group called Silverchair.
Oh, yes.
That's the next one.
Well, I'll be extremely excited to hear that.
Me too. I can't wait to work hard. Do you have any questions? I've talked too much and said too little.
Oh, I've got so many questions, but I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I do have a few questions I'd like to talk to you about. So, yeah, because I mentioned Orange Crate art earlier, just in terms of and you mentioned also that you try to make each voice be interesting. Each voice have its own identity. The bass line has to be really interesting. The top line has to be interesting. The inner voices can't be neglected, and so on.
Well, it has to be rational. What
do you mean rational?
Well, I mean, you know, you don't do that. And you know, so you need, I think that when you hear something, even that, but that's what I used to love about Schubert, of course, that I love those tectonic plates between events, you know, so they're like deception, you know, the cliffhangers, you know, I like subito this, subito that, everything. Right. To me, it's good to find a way to agitate as well as to comfort. And so, but I honestly believe that the madrigals that I had to sing and loved to sing, today being May 2nd, it would remind me of Now Is the Month of Maying, a wonderful madrigal. I think it's maybe one of my top 10 madrigal experiences. And madrigals, in singing them as a pre-adolescent, I knew right away that the smarts it took for people to come up with this stuff, because they kept four voices de minimis. They kept four voices interested in life and interested in their own evolution through this piece, as if all things were reconfigured throughout and then finally converged in a satisfying, dramatic conclusion. My favorite song, and that's when I learned about what voice leading means to me. I learned the difference between having a wall of brass available in a rock and roll arrangement or something that people might hear or not hear over a fuzz guitar. I learned the difficulty of writing trio or a quartet work, the incredible, the engineering that it took to get that architect's dreams set firmly, all had to do with the integrity of the guaranteeing the independence of every voice to make it an interesting event and suffer that kind of close inspection. I realized how difficult small writing can be. I think one of my favorite arrangements is one I did for Sam Phillips called I'm Wasting My Time. It's a YouTube away. You can get it for free like everything else I've done. And I'm Wasting My Time, I wrote it for 3 cellos. Well, they didn't play at the same time. But one cellist played them one time and then again. And it wasn't until the 3rd cello was down that they realized that the vivaciousness and the adequacy, adequate is a good word, the adequacy of my effort was a tremendously buoyant, I mean, it went above the surface tension and delivered the song. Matter of fact, the singer took off her rhythm guitar because it was gratuitous, she felt.
Huh.
It also happened to me in the 5 weeks it took me to finish the chamber orchestra for Renara George. She gave me the 12 songs. I got them done in 5 weeks. And I did it as a response to the rhythmic pattern she set forth on her guitar, and then she removed the guitar. So we're looking at a reverse image. To me, it was very phenomenal. So the stuff that happens beyond your wildest dreams is, to me, terrific. I don't know what your original question was because I digress.
No, it was just about the variety and the richness of the harmonic writing that you do, and just the interest that exists in every single line all the time. Right? And you mentioned also the value of surprise in your writing, which I also think is very interesting, because there's a lot of sudden chromatic modulations in those songs where you don't expect it at all, and suddenly it veers off into a completely different key suddenly. And that happens a fair bit, actually, on that record in particular, Orange Crate Art.
Which record are you talking about?
Orange Crate Art.
Yeah, well, you know that I loved, listen, I thought Hobo Heart had a great deception. I agree with the man who tweeted me the other day, and tweet me at the Van Dyke Parks. Very funny stuff. I have funny stuff that, to me, I am basically bent on confirmation. I like people to feel that they're going to make it through another goddamn day.
Huh.
And, and that with no abrasions or contusions, and that society will one day reveal itself as a positive social value. And I think society has shown itself to disappoint. And that is why, as Jim Ford, the great songwriter, once said, happy songs sell records, sad songs sell beer. Now is no time for musicians to develop an auteur because of their musical ability and stay inaccessible, because nobody's going to give a goddamn. And you won't realize it until your hair has turned to straw and you step out into the ice field abandoned, because it happens to everyone. The idea is to learn how to ingratiate an audience, bring a collectivism of thought into positive political process. That, to me, is my job in the scant time I have left to do anything.
Uh-huh. Well,
that's the truth.
Well, it strikes me, though, that Songs Cycled is actually a deeply serious record, possibly more than anything else you've undertaken, actually. It's got, I mean, it would be hard to think of anything sadder and more upsetting than the song Wall Street, for example. I mean, it's not an easy topic to address in a song. This is deeply tragic, what you're describing.
Yeah. I think the amazing thing about Songs Cycled, put out by a British, put out as a consolation prize for me by a British label called Bella Union. Mm-hmm. Anybody who can buy a physical property to keep a musician ahead of the rent curve, we rent, has got my hats off. The Wall Street song was a reaction to the phone call I had with my daughter, who was 2 blocks away when the first plane hit. And she was running when she called me. I was in California. She was in New York. She said, Dad, what do I do? I said, what are you doing? And she said, as that wall of ash started to snake its way quickly past Wall Street and move north, it was chasing her up the island, that wall of ash. I said, what are you doing? She said, I'm running as fast as I can. Where are you going? I don't know. So it turns out Diane von Furstenberg had a great designer, had an apartment close by. She got ingress there. It was a very big deal. And instead of pulling what I mentioned how melodic I've always felt Neil Young's voice is, how grateful I am to Warner Brothers for making him the standard of American entente. And he said, let's roll. First thing Neil Young wanted to do was come out with a record that says, let's roll, which was retaliatory in nature, by the way, in case you're wondering.
Yeah, yeah.
And with an intimation that Muslims need to be watched. And of course they do. Everybody needs to be watched. With a veil or not, they're all got to be watched. And I thought that Wall Street raised more questions than provide answers. The questions that arose had to do with greed, the precepts of competition as a necessity for capitalism, in its presumption that growth is a fundamental requirement in a finite planet. That is called suicide, where I come from. So I wanted a song which, yes, must belabor you with some thought, to rethink, to reposition, reset your thought. I asked a lot of the song. I wish I'd had a voice to sing it.
I just had a couple other things I wanted to ask you about, because it's such an extraordinary opportunity to get to talk to you. I feel like I have to take full advantage of it. I've heard a number of critics refer to composers like Charles Ives in relation to your work, and there is a whole tradition in American music of people taking popular musics of various kinds and sort of putting it into unusual territory or context. I guess you might put it that way. Harry Partch also comes to mind, and then you also have the Australian Percy Grainger, who I know you're a fan of. So, do you have a sense of kinship with these sorts of composers?
I think Ives would be revolted by the general tenor of my entire catalog. I would certainly hope that he would not even be distracted by it from above. Grainger, I met him in passing when he came to Carnegie Tech. He had a wheelchair. The reason I liked Grainger, of course, is because he did so much to popularize the roots music. And I've often felt that if I could do anything, it would be to orchestrate or arrange, that is, bring to literature something from the oral tradition. You know that you are aware, Sam, Andreyev, you are aware that Grainger did this with London Derriere, and that is not an anatomical reference. He did it for the Doughboys and their ally brethren to sing in mustard fields of mustard warfare of Flanders and so forth like this. Equally adroit at doing something highly sophisticated, like how to write a piece around an organ pedal that just stuck on one great note, pedal point, with a maze of harmonic contortions around that. Parch, yes, very much so, because I was aware of him, because of his interest, like Grainger, his interest in tuneful percussion. And I realized that tuneful percussion is ear candy, and it's something that was brought to bring enunciation into thoughts in recorded music a great deal. And I started being aware of that in 1948. I was 5 years old when I heard Spike Jones. I realized then what tuneful percussion would do. It's something that it did in parades that passed by. And therein, Ives realized how tuneful percussion could enunciate and make more obvious some otherwise missed component of an aggregate orchestra. And so, yes, um, all of those, but what really, I think the unifying field in that, I think that's where you're looking for an answer, and that's why you ask a question. I think the answer is that I love the commonality that those people represent, which is vernacular.
Yes.
And to that, you could add so that would not exist if we'd not had Louis Moreau Gottschalk in Spain as the court pianist to the wife of the king in the 19th century. Gottschalk wrote it down. He wrote down that melody, and that's why we have it. So, big argument. I've been in a lot of beer bars where walking in there and living in the defamed prejudice that pianists endure in American popular music. When I started playing piano, when Bob Dylan, 1963, Bob Dylan came in and started playing steel string, I was interested in picado, nylon strings, and so forth. And I decided that I knew that my time was up as a guitarist. Everybody was going to go steel string. I could hire somebody like Lorendo Almeida or some. I'd seen Segovia twice in performance, by the way. And so, I mean, I knew some things about guitar and I could play real well. And as a matter of fact, I was hired to play at one point by a group. I went to Boston to back up a folk group, and they made $9,000 a night. And that was in 1963 and 4. In the folk music revival. And I had great ability as a guitarist because I worked hard. Now that all changed, you see. And I went to piano, and I remember at first, hearing people say, well, there's bluegrass, New York City, what are you doing? And they thinking that the piano was some kind of a fagula, light in the loafers, kind of effeminate or emasculine. I would that rotten, dismissive attitude. It was awful. And finally, one day I heard that Bill Monroe, the guy who invented bluegrass, Bill Monroe loved piano, and he loved having piano, and in his consortia, and and to. Forked deer, great folk music in bluegrass, and a piano, and I've had some great times playing piano guitar duets with people like Bill Frisell and so forth, and my son, the mandolinist. And so I became indispensable as a pianist because those guys didn't want to be caught dead in the background playing, facing a wall behind the front line and the women that addressed it. So I was playing piano, and that's how I ended up on the piano, and ended up being interested in how to address the dilemma of music that is dependent on an oral tradition, such oral tradition dying. Look at a telephone. Remember a conversation on a telephone. Remember glacial ice. But let's go with a conversation on a telephone. Two people could laugh at the same time. That doesn't happen on an iPhone because of the noise gate. It's an inferior instrument in terms of dialogue. What do you mean? What do you mean? Did you just say, what do you mean? What do you mean? Right now, we're not even in sync because of technology that it takes. I'm not just disparaging this great invention, but so I would say that, there's a parallel there. In fact, I turn to the familiar in so many ways to express, uh, to reach an abstract consideration. If I can just get somebody not to know something, I'll feel I've done a service to others. That may be the best I can do. You mentioned something. Your question was essentially what I should write this stuff down. What did you ask me?
Well, I was asking you about the sort of tradition of composers like Ives, or Antheil, Harry Partch, Percy Grainger.
Yeah, no, yes. So then the idea is all of these people, you see, to me, these are the guys who were there at the Big Bang. And what is the Big Bang to me in music? For me, a simpleton like me, where do I go? What are my resources? What will inform the menu tonight? What that is basically is the oral tradition. And the interesting thing about it, and the reason that there should be urgency in this, is because this stuff is disappearing. Let me tell you something. For 7 years, I went pro bono, and that doesn't mean I wanted to meet Cher. I went pro bono to Berlin. They gave me a business class ticket. I went to Berlin. I got no money. I was away from my lovely wife. And there I was one of 8 advisors on an advisory board. For 7 years, I sat there at that arts institution called Haus der Kulturen der Welt, House of the World's Cultures, Germany's largest arts organization, 48 permanent employees. What do they have in their purview? Oh, over 100,000 wax cylinders gathered by the Humboldt Foundation, songs that no longer are heard, languages which are dead. We are losing languages like crazy. So to me, World Beat is a sensible solution to that. I've taken a small, I left a door ajar in my life, as you can see. What with the crippled violinist at the beginning of By the People on Song Cycle, a man just had no money. Came in to play the violin, something Russian, something he remembered having eaten grass, crossing the grasslands in Russia to escape communism and get to the United States. So that's why I had a Russian diet. Why did I have a Calypso diet? They'd fed me. My brother and I were broke. These people, I owed them everything. I owed them more than a chicken dinner. I owed them an homage to their own culture. All of these things, to me, that the musical electives you have can be societal. Just find out who's broke around you and bring the best out in him.
Right.
Mutual empowerment being the key. You cannot be in charge. You cannot be in charge. He who leads best leads least. It is Brian Wilson. He's enjoyed a long career under the shadow of being called a genius. That was an ad campaign of Derek Taylor's. I introduced him to the publicist Derek Taylor, the Beatles publicist. Well, he's a very bright musician. And I think it's safe to say that his genius is in his ability for empowerment, for mutual empowerment. So if you're interested, if you want to work alone, I'm sure that whoever wants to work alone, I think, has hung up by now, dear Sam. We've lost our audience of one. But if there's anybody on our line, I think that it is this benefit of empowerment. If you're interested in being in a room of people, everyone is there for mutual empowerment. And that's what is suggested in the chamber music operations I use to reach my orchestral ideal. What is that, by the way? If you look at Eleanor Rigby, you see you're in the face with a quartet. It's all secco, it's all front and center. It's in the face, a beautiful refreshment, great geography. Everything was good decisions, real good decisions. And then, but you might want to reach transparency. I do that with a string section and sometimes that's 9 violins, that's three on a note, so you avoid intonational problems. Two violins on a note, you're inviting intonational problems, and certainly a little more rehearsal time might have helped the show. 3 violin lines, you get at least what the Brazilians call desafinado, a kind of a beautiful mellifluousness. And so sometimes I'll use 9 violins on 3 lines, or 10, so that I can have a solo off of the first chair, right. You know, and still, so I do that. And then I'll settle for 2 violas because there are microphones these days, and the room will still sound. To that, I can add a harp, which has a vigorous role to play because it's part of our oral tradition. It's something that a troubadour would carry. It's so, man, harps are ethnic. And then you can start using chromatic stuff in a harp if you know how to spell the pedals, and the pedals go like this: D, C, B, E, F, G, A.
Yeah.
Did Captain Bligh ever fear God Almighty? This is how you keep your footwork together, so you know what is possible to play, and never put a harpist under a red light, because that makes it impossible to dive for a note.
Right.
So, yeah, we know stuff. We know stuff.
Yes.
And, so I hope that answered the question. So it's the idea, and that's why if I went to Britain, if I want to go to Britain to enjoy British music, and I'm tired of being in a nation that knows only its own culture and speaks only its own language, I'll stop off in Britain. There is Martin Carthy, a man decorated by the Queen for preserving British music, pre-industrial music. I'd spent so much time learning about William Carroll and the legacy that he left in preserving British music at the dawn of the age of industry, his father having been such a multimillionaire industrialist. That's the people went into the tenements, they lost their sentiments, they lost their language, and that language was music, and it was dominated by the bard, who would spend a week in a village to tell a single tale. So I go to Martin Carthy if I'm going to England. Somebody once asked a rector of ours, how did you like the funeral mass of Andrew Lloyd Webber? First of all, I don't trust anybody with 3 names. But Andrew Lloyd Webber had written a funeral mass. How did you like it? Somebody asked the rector. Oh no, his wife asked me. Well, I remembered this. Sally can corroborate everything that I say or tell us that I'm wrong. But the quote is accurate, and it is from Erich Leinsdorf. He was a doctor. He was one of the great Teutonic conductors of the 20th century, and somebody that really put his orchestra in a world-class position. Erich Leinsdorf was asked how he felt about Andrew Lloyd Webber's funeral mass. And he said, without losing a beat, he said, "Who can imagine what would drive a man of such common Broadway abilities to attempt such a thing? One can only imagine that it was greed, or perhaps vanity. But I think in this case, both. Though I'm no athlete, I would run to the farthest corners of the earth to have to avoid listening to such a thing."
That's extraordinary. That should be in the Encyclopedia of Musical Invective that you mentioned earlier.
I don't memorize many things, but when success of failure comes face to face with success of, I think, undeserved success, then I draw the line.
It's so interesting talking to you. There's just so many things I wanted to say in reaction. One of them is that you mentioned about languages and preserving all these languages that are disappearing. You might be interested to know, I live in Strasbourg, which lies right on the border between France and Germany, in Alsace, where there is a local dialect, and it's spoken only by a tiny number of people, mainly paysans, mainly the sort of peasantry, so to speak.
It's French, a French dialect, right?
It's mainly Germanic, yeah, with an influence of German, but it's a very interesting dialect, and you hear it when I go to the market to do my shopping. I hear them speaking Alsatian, and it's absolutely magnificent. I love it, and it's wonderful to be in a place where these sorts of things are kept alive. You know, it's this little slice of territory between France and Germany that's been handed back and forth between the two countries many times over the centuries, and.
Yeah, I realized there was some mustard gas involved there too. But you know, hey, do you get Föhnwinter? Do you get those do you get socked in sky, leaden skies? They have them in Munich. I learned about it in 1957. I spent 6 months over there.
We do.
And they would sometimes dismiss a case in a crime due to the depression that said the weather imposed. Isn't that something? I learned about
that doesn't surprise me. Well, geographically, we're locked between the Vosges mountains on the French side and the Black Forest on the German side. So it's basically a big valley. And when a weather pattern sets in, it just is stuck there. It has nowhere to go. So that can be very nice.
I want to tell you something. I just learned that there is Jackson Browne's wife heads a thing called the Plastics Coalition of Plastics. That there are microplastics in the fields, the alpine fields. And those are being ingested by the cattle and into the milk of the babes. And Jackson Browne's wife monitors this problem of plastics, the microplastics. Plastics are forever, they're breaking down. I've just written a song about that for a Dutch company. I hope it will do them some good. She has, this is what I just received from her.
Oh yes.
That is not good. Yeah, I hadn't seen that.
So I made a very nice song to dedicate it to the very possibility that I might help alert people to this, to an act of to legislate a ban on the use of single-use plastic, that is straws, plastic bags, et al. And reduce and get our toilet training in line for a legacy that will one day ask, what the fuck did they do to us? And it's happening, and we're seeing it, and they will judge us harshly. I don't want to be part of that. That's why I make a noise. To me, this is letting out a trade secret. This is like letting somebody know how to make the word capades on a synthesizer out of white noise. I'm saying something that is to me, a mine for a treasure for anyone to share, and that is to brand your works with an ecological awareness, one that pays as much attention to the windshield as the rear view mirror. And I try to keep that perspective in my work. Isn't that a cute little way of looking at it? But that's really the way that makes it easier for me to remind myself. Like when you say that I go from one, and my compartmentalizing the sections of a song might go from one key to another. Sometimes it's just to relieve the fact that I've been on the 3 same chords for the last 20 seconds. So I am always compensating for my inefficiency, but it's too late on this. The cat's out of the bag. Was there anything else we should do, Sam?
One final question, and I really appreciate your taking all this time. By the way, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you. One thing that really intrigues me is we've talked a lot about the vernacular. We've talked about your insistence that music has to be a collaborative activity in which everybody is welcome. You want to welcome people into it. But what is the difference then between popular music and commercial music? Because it's not really the same thing. There's popular music that isn't commercially successful, and there's commercial music that isn't really popular. So
I've attempted to like when I did the Ice Capades commercial on the Moog, since I wanted to prove that I was commercial, but I knew I wasn't. So, and I was interested in. I wrote a piece called Public Domain, which was by Dyke Parks, and I had another piece called Dyke Parks, which was public domain, in which I didn't collect a cent. What would have been a fraction of a cent, considering that they gave it away. But so I see no difference in any of this. I think it does get to be a bore, kind of tedious. When, let's say you have, Rufus Wainwright was over here at the house yesterday, and he has written his second opera. He challenged me to write an opera, and in the press one day he said, I challenged Dyke Parks to write an opera. Well, you know, I want to really take due caution that I don't want my ambition to outreach my ability. That would be stupid. So I want to think that if I've done a work that people will be, in the final analysis, be gratified that I brought it to their attention. I don't want to do a thin opera.
Jump is fantastic, and that has an operatic quality to it.
Let's look at that. A Jump, for example, I attempted to get it patronized, funded, because it takes money to come up with these sets and stuff, and get the insurance for the leaps of faith. It does. And, but there comes a point, and I had Act 2 down, where the dead child is lifted from his father's easy chair and ascends in a cloud to a black angel who pulls him into a golden chariot, and they ride off into the clouds as a pneumatic choir rises in the proscenium to end Act 1 on death. So sounds operatic, doesn't it? But I went to it through a record album, which I hoped would be a popular record album, which would then find its way into being a musical. That wasn't my idea, but somebody suggested it, and I finally realized, yes, it could be a musical, and put it to good use. There's a difference between the funding of a musical and an opera, and any serious musician who's come close to trying to find that out has to bifurcate that situation and get used to the idea that he's going to be tugging of war with opera, with the opera mavens or the plebeians down there in pop music. You have to make a decision. Isn't that unfortunate? So I backed off that arena. I tell anybody who's going to book me into a room, I'm not thinking beer here. We're looking wine. I don't care if they dance. I want some people to be able to sit down comfortably. So you have to make a decision about who your audience is going to be. And I'm thinking about coming to Alsace to figure that out. So, I mean, this is just the beginning. So, but if I come to Alsace, I guarantee you I won't be talking. I'll be listening to that dying language with most appreciative ears.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks to you, Sam.
It's magnificent. My downstairs neighbor, she's probably asleep in her bed right now. She's about 88 years old, and she's an Alsatian, and she has the most beautiful accent. It's extraordinary, and she's lived through everything. She's changed nationalities 6 times over the course of her life, and just to be able to be in proximity with these sorts of people that are so tightly tied up with the history of this particular landscape is an absolute privilege. It's
and why did you go there?
Well, I lived in Paris for 11 years. The reason I went to Paris, I wanted to study composition at the Paris Conservatoire, so that's what I did. And then after I did that, I stayed for a long time, and I stayed so long that it became my home, effectively. Because I left Canada when I was quite young, when I was 22 years old, and I've been in France.
I remember that.
Yeah, I've been here for a long time now, and but Paris is a harsh environment. It's you know, it's crowded. I understand that your wife lived there for a while in the.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, I know it pre and post IMP, and she very thick with Provence and stuff. She knows, she works so hard there. But so yeah. Anyway, but I hope that and then you decided to do Alsace for what reason, I ask?
Oh, to have a better quality of life, to be closer to nature, to not be in financial distress at all times, and we're absolutely delighted to live here.
I hope that we will get ourselves, unless you're sober, in which case I'm scraping you off like a barnacle. But if we're worth some potables and a good meal, we should share it. I think I owe you one in Alsace, and I hope we get to see each other, your wife and my wife, and let them tell us we're wrong.
That would be a delight for the ages. Let's do it.
Okay, Sam. You stay strong, Sam.
Yeah.
And thank you for this journey.
If you like this channel, support it. Your help allows me to keep on making high-quality music education videos available to anyone around the world who wants to watch them at any time for free. Check out the rewards for varying levels of support at www.patreon.com/Samuel Andreyev. Thanks for watching.